device. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, here we go. Okay, fixed. Let's go back. So you probably couldn't hear me this entire time, and you were like going, "Oh my God, what's going on? Why can't I hear Tom?" And you couldn't hear me because basically my mic was turned off in OBS somehow. Let's go back. So I said that the final practical exam is due Saturday, April 24th, 2021 at midnight. Yes, thank you very much. And then I was going into what I'm looking for. What I'm saying is you can use any of the, you're going to use the tutorial framework as an example. Your primary task will be implement depth of field, something that we haven't really talked about in a lot of details this semester. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to select a tutorial or a sample from the tutorial framework for yourself to use. Any one of the samples that you've talked about. Obviously, you don't have to choose, as an example, the latest one, which is tutorial 7. You can choose any of the tutorials as long as it matches your requirements. And you can use the same objects in there that you've already used. One thing I've asked that's a little different for the tutorial base to give you some marks is what I want you to do is in the tutorial scene, right, modify the tutorial scene by adding your own game objects, one of your own game objects at least, and maybe subtracting some stuff, moving stuff away there to give yourself the effect you want, just to make sure that it's your own. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. All right, going back to this. So what I want you to do is implement depth of field. That is the stuff that I wanted you to do here. And one thing I was saying is you don't need to include Bokeh because it's an extra thing. And I want to talk about what this thing is. So depth of field is this effect which affects objects. So objects that appear that are in some range, as an example, appear to be sharply in focus, and other objects that are outside of that range or closer to you appear out of focus, almost like a blurred effect, right? And what this post-processing effect does is it helps direct the viewer's attention, as an example, to a specific spot in the scene. And so it can add dramatic effect, as an example, especially when you're having a character have a dialogue role. You can focus on the character's face, or if you want, there's a lot of action happening, and you want to focus the player in a specific spot or somewhere where you want them to understand there's something important. You can use this post-processing effect to do that. So post-processing effect, really what we're looking for is it draws the viewer's attention, and there's two things you have to think about. The distance, the focal distance between the camera and the focus point or the subject. You can have a narrow depth of field, and you can have also a very large depth of field. The larger the depth of field is, the more in focus things are. And that's what I was looking at before. And I was pointing to, before you guys let me know, this little simulator that's online we can use to show you some adjustments we can make to the depth of field. One of them is the focal length of the camera. All right, so you can change this. You can also change the f-stop value, and the closer it gets to 1, the more blurry it is compared to where it's farther away. You can also change the focus on the model. So, for example, as I can move closer, you can see that the model can come closer. I can also move the model further out. So these are all things that you can do. I can also adjust for different kinds of lenses, if you will. Here, I don't expect any of this effect for you to have in your little demo. It's not required, and we're not actually trying to simulate what it really looks like on a camera. We're trying to make an effect happen in our video game. So it's going to be slightly different than this. But if you wanted to simulate what it looks like on a Canon lens, then you can more closely simulate what that looks like, and you can see that these numbers would have changed. So that's really what it does. You can also change a bunch of other things. So where the depth of field is. So you can see I can move the model closer or farther out. And as an example, what you can also do, if you do that, you can see that the depth of field increases, or you can make the depth of field decrease as well. Okay, so those are the things you can do here in this little simulator. Just to give you an idea of what depth of field is. It's okay. I wouldn't say this is the be-all and end-all of simulators, but it's kind of neat. Okay, so that's kind of something that we wanted to look at together. All right, so I want to talk about the circle of confusion a little bit, because that is one thing that you're going to be talking about a lot. So what is the circle of confusion? So really it decides how blurry a pixel should be. All right, that's what the circle of confusion. And there's a way of calculating this. All right, so one thing is for world space distance from the camera object, and we want to be able to get that because we want to that circle of confusion is where you're going to have that area that is in kind of the plane of focus, and you're going to have areas outside of the plane of focus, which is going to be blurred. Okay, so that's how it's going to be. So to generate this or to calculate the circle of confusion, you take the aperture itself. So you're going to have to change your camera a little bit. Right now, the camera that we have currently doesn't really have an aperture, doesn't have a focal length, doesn't have all these things, right? So if you wanted to use this formula, you'd have to change the camera a little bit to give it additional features, okay? So aperture, focal length, and then you kind of multiply by the object distance, whatever that is, minus the plane in focus. So where do you want your plane? Divided by, again, you're normalizing here, the object distance times the plane in focus minus the focal length. That's what that is. That bottom part, the denominator, is just really a normalization value to give you a number between 0 and 1. Okay, that's really what it does. That's the, kind of the circle of confusion, if you will. And then what you're going to be doing is the object distance, if you want to calculate what that is calculated from the z values in the z buffer, right? So object distance then would be a negative z far times z near divided by the formula you see here. Alternatively, what you can do is you can calculate the circle of confusion from the z buffer values with the camera parameters lumped into something called scale and bias. And again, you can expose these terms when inside of the of your IM GUI or even with controls if you want to. But more or less what it looks like is circle of confusion is the absolute value of your Z values multiplied by your circle of confusion scale plus your circle of confusion bias. And you can calculate these two things separately like this. Again, what you'd need is an aperture number, some kind of focal length, right? So focal length probably should be with a capital L since we're using that everywhere else. And then multiplied by the plane in focus. Sorry, I should change these values just to be consistent. I apologize. But the idea here is that you're just going to do the same thing. It's just broken up these two values slightly differently. But notice what you need if you're going to do this. You need something called the aperture and the focal length. So again, some hints of what you need to figure out in order for you to calculate the circle of confusion. All right, so OpenGL's perspective projections simulate a pinhole camera with everything in the scene in perfect focus. That's one thing to keep in mind. So it's like a pinhole camera we're looking through. And what you're going to do is you're going to change the focal length, right? And what it does when you change the focal length, and I'm going to get you guys to read that about that. What it does is it changes the, kind of what appears to be in focus and what appears to be blurred, where as well. A lot of times what we do is we use something called the accumulation buffer. And the accumulation buffer is this giant color buffer that allows compositing. We've talked about this throughout the semester. And so what you're going to be doing is you can't really directly write to the buffer necessarily, but you can use it as compositing. You can kind of layer different things together. So one thing that you could do is take a snapshot of everything in focus, take a snapshot of everything in kind of blurry, and then composite them together, and you decide which area is going to be in focus and which areas are going to be blur. So if that particular plane of focus, right, or we like to call it plane in focus, as an example, if any object is in that plane in focus, then you would see things nicely and clearly, but anything out of there would be just blur. All right, so that's kind of a very simplified way of doing it. Again, it doesn't matter to me. One thing that they do is they use depth of field effects by something called jittering the eye point and the direction of view. And this jitter is, kind of the way they create this effect. This is one way of doing it. And I've kind of put in an example of that here, where you can take a look at the distance from the eye point to the subject, if you will, or the target. Okay. I've also included potential programming solutions here. So again, here's one: post-render light gathering. Okay, this is one way of doing it. So render the entire scene into an image buffer, sharp image. It's usually a 2D array, color array, and then determine the max diameter of the circle of confusion. So whatever that diameter is. And then based on the value of the depth map, re-render each pixel by averaging values together inside of the circle of confusion to create that effect. So why are we doing it in a circle, not in some other shape? It will look unnatural if you did it some other way. It wouldn't approximate the effect as well. And that's why we use this idea of circle of confusion. So the circle of confusion size is really the diameter size or the radius, kind of from the target. So circle of confusion size for a given pixel is calculated as a linear approximation from 0 to 100 or 0 to 1, depending on if you want to look at that, of circle of confusion max, the maximum size of the circle of confusion, right? Depending on the difference between the object and the critical plane of focus, wherever you want that plane to be, that is how you're going to calculate the circle of confusion size. And then if the circle of confusion is smaller than 1 pixel, then we use the sharp image. Okay, so that's kind of a way of differentiating, and it's called post-render light gathering. Another way, downscale blur post-render averaging. Okay, so here's the next one. So render the entire scene into an image buffer, sharp image, right, as an example. Downscale the image to 1/16 into something called a blur buffer. Okay, and you can calculate it here where you take the X and Y values and you literally divide them by 16. All right, and then and that equals kind of the X and Y's that each pixel inside of the color buffer in sharp image. So you're taking that and basically chopping it down to 1/16 the size. Then you're going to perform a 3x3 Gaussian blur on the blur buffer. You just got the blur buffer, all those things, and then based on the depth map that you have, right? So depth values, you're going to re-render each pixel by averaging the values between the sharp image and the blur buffer, right? And you want to use a sliding scale to control the blur buffer. So here's another thing you can expose on your interface where you have, let's say, for example, 75% of blur is equal to your sharp image multiplied by 0.25 plus the blur buffer, which is X and Y from the sharp image, times 0.75. So there's an example of how you do that. I've included several references here, including a shader toy example of, what depth of field is, some really great reading. Especially if you're interested in CG, I think it's worthwhile taking a look at these examples here. And then I've also included, and Nick recommended this, a Unity tutorial. He said that you often follow a Unity tutorial with him, and then you modify that Unity tutorial so it works with Opengl. So again, I welcome that as well. So I've included this Unity tutorial to help you. So that is really part one. Implement depth of field your way. Find a way that it works. Make sure that it makes sense. It's realistic. Again, based on any of the scenes, sample scenes that you get from the tutorials, framework. Okay. And again, you don't have to do bokeh for this part. So bokeh normally accompanies, depth of field because it gives us that really crisp, interesting looking effect. And let me show you what that looks like. So, so you don't have to do that. One thing you have to do definitely though is you have to have your debug with toggle keys and UI buttons, whatever you want. I've given that 20 marks and I'll tell you why. So I still want you to turn on and toggle lighting. I think it's really cool to turn on and turn off these things and to see the effect of what that looks like when you add things like depth of field. So turn on and turn off stuff, add depth of field, and that'll be your post effect this time instead of bloom as an example. And also what I've also asked you to do is add additional controls to adjust the depth of field interactively. Example would be interpolate the focus plane. So move it around, right? As an example. You can change different parameters. You can add any parameters you want here to adjust. So things like the field of view you want to make so that you can change where the near plane and far plane is on the camera, the aperture, all those kind of things that you can adjust if you want to, which might make sense for you for depth of field. Okay, so that's what I'm asking for in your debug keys. Notice here, again, no bokeh for the standard way of doing things. Then you're going to make a demo video as normal. You can explain your code and math you use, maybe even talk about where you got your references from and so on. And then as a bonus, you can add in bokeh, the bokeh effect with depth of field. So what it does is really kind of neat. Usually what happens is it comes from, it's a photography term. And really what it is It's an important characteristic of depth of field in that it warps or changes some of the the reflections, right, to create these interesting shapes, right? So here's some recommended reading about Bokeh if you're interested in getting this bonus. It's worth 10 points, so 10% of your final practical exam I'll give you as a bonus if you implement Bokeh. Bokeh shapes are usually a reflected light in and out of focus areas. That's what they are, right? And typically we see circular, hexagonal, and octagonal shaped bokeh, right? What I'm looking for you is to choose at least 2 shapes that you can kind of shift in and out of. That's what I want you to do. So choose maybe a circle shape or a hexagonal shape or an octagonal shape. It's up to you. Circle shape is the easiest one, obviously. To get the desired bokeh effect shape, if it's not circular, you can basically you can take samples horizontally and then vertically to create these different effects. All right, so you can create almost like this diamond effect to create a hexagon or an octagon. Okay, and there's different methodologies that, again, they talk about it here in this paper on how to do that. All right, so that is the bokeh effect for a 10% bonus if you're motivated to do so. Okay, submit a link to your GitHub repository. You need that part, as well as a video link to your 5-minute presentation. Okay, again, I'm not looking for a huge presentation. And this whole thing, if it's taking you a long time to figure out, like more than 2 hours, you're looking in the wrong place. It shouldn't take you that long, especially given the fact that you have a framework to start with, and you're modifying it to add this one effect. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. And the rubric is as follows: your base 10. Your depth of field is 70. This should actually be 20. So this should be 60. I don't know why I left it there. I do apologize. So 10, 30, and 60 is 90, and 10 for the video. So I'm giving you 20 points. Just going back here just to modify this. And I'll update the PDF online just so no one's confused. I'm giving you 20 points for this. So it's got to add up to 100, guys. I'm sorry. And it's going to be 60 points for your depth of field here. And so that way you have a good chance of pulling this off. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. So on that, what I've asked you to do is, and I know there's some people watching on YouTube right now, as well as on, I've got some people on Discord. Any questions for the people that are watching, please, if you're on YouTube and you're watching this video, please post a question. I can answer them for you before we move on. But what I'm also going to talk about next is how to do a private repo with GitHub. Okay, so how do I set that up, and what does that mean, private versus public? It actually doesn't mean much of anything in terms of programming. It doesn't take much to do it. You don't have to use anything else other than Gitkraken. If you want to use if you used Gitkraken before or SourceTree, you can continue using that. You don't have to do anything with with your tool. You can do it all online, and I'll show you where to do that right now. Okay, so let's take a look. So I'm going to go up online and let's create a private repository. I'm going to go to github.com and /Ontario Tech University. And I have, you can see there's a couple of private repositories plus some other public repositories here. So what it would be like for me to make a private repository? Well, I'm going to click on make new repository here, just like you normally would online. And then there it is. There's that control, public or private. By default, it's private. Okay, but here's the trick. You need to make us collaborators, all right? You need to make us collaborators. And how do you do that? Well, let's talk about that and what email address you should use for me. And we're going to give you that. One thing I should probably have done is include that in the document, how to do that. Right. So again, if I make it private, if you make it private, I won't be able to see it, and Nick won't be able to see it by default. Okay, that's one thing to know. So let's suppose I made it private, and let's call this, example exam repo. Okay, so there's my example exam repo, and I'm just going to just press enter, and it's going to give me some steering directions on how to create a repository and how to set up a remote and all that kind of stuff. That's really what it's going to do. Now, let's suppose I made it private and I want to make it public, or I made it public and I want to make it private. Okay, so what you do is you go into settings, and then you go into manage access on the left, right? And on the left, you put in your password. Okay, there's your password. And then you can specify who has access as an example, or not. So if I want to say manage access, I can kind of click on, now I can invite here. Because I'm using Ontario Tech University, it says manage access and it says invite teams or people. If I click this, I can put the person's GitHub repository in here. Now my GitHub repository for everyone to know, and I'll put this down here in my, in the PowerPoint so you see it recorded. Mine is my last name at hotmail.com. Okay, so that is my general inbox that I use just across different organizations. Captures a lot of junk too, unfortunately. But if you use this one, that is the email address that you can use to find me. Please use this email address. Don't use Tom Tsiliopoulos. That's another one that I use for business, right? But if you do this, you'll get my GitHub repo and I'll have access to yours. If you don't use this one, I won't have access. It'll be private and I will not ever be able to see your repository, or neither will anyone else, okay? So that's what you will use for, so include me as a collaborator. Okay, now Nick also has a repository, and I'm going to make sure that I update that online. Collaborator, if I can spell collaborator, will be good. There we go. So that's what it is. That's my email address. Okay, and once you do that, let's suppose I want to invite anybody else. So so for example, we know Nick is Sir Mouth a Lot. You can see if I search for Sir Mouth a Lot, I can include Nick in this one. Okay, so there's Nick, Sir Mouth a Lot. Or I can put in his email address, one of the two, right? If I include Sir Mouth a Lot, you can give Nick or myself any type of access you want. So for example, if you want to give me write access, you can do that. Or if you want to give me anything else, all I need to see is read access. I don't need to write back to your repository. So as long as you give us read access, you're golden. Okay, I'm fine with that. And then you just click on add Sir Mouth a Lot to this repository. And for me, it would be my Tsiliopoulos, which is my last name. That's what you would do. As soon as you do this, then what's going to happen is we'll get an email sent to us that says, so-and-so has given you access to this repository. As an example, do you agree? And basically I would click on an email and then I would have access to your repository. Until I accept access, I don't have access. So I have to physically do something to accept. So that's how it works in terms of adding people to as a collaborator. So you just have to follow that. And once you've added a team or people, and it's usually people for us, so me, myself, and Nick separately, that's how you do it there. Okay, so that is how you manage it. If I go to manage now, so let's go back there. So if I go to who has access, and I click manage instead of invite, manage, then what ends up happening is I can go into this danger zone. And in the danger zone, I can change my visibility of my repository. So let's say you're not confident or you couldn't find myself and Nick, and you know what, for whatever reason, you can't make this work. It's okay, guys. Worst case scenario, if you can't make it private, really this privacy is not for me, it's for you. Because a lot of times I've got some comments that people feel that other students are looking at their code or whatever, and they feel nervous about that. And I've wanted to give you an avenue on making it private so that you don't feel like somebody else is looking at your code other than myself and Nick. Okay, but if you feel comfortable, I'm okay with you making it public as well, if that's easier for you, and of course it is. But let's suppose I want to make it public and I made a mistake and I made it private, then I can click on change visibility. Or if I did it the other way around, if I made it public and I want to make it private now, and then I can certainly make it either public or private. I can toggle this option, and then you just have to kind of specify the name of your repository in this little box here. Once I do this, as an example, not focal length, once I do that by copying and pasting, let's try that again. You can see that it lights up. It gives me the ability for me to click on the button, and once I do that, now my repository is public. It's no longer private. Okay, and if I wanted to switch it back, so I go settings and I scroll all the way down to the danger zone, I can switch it from public to private. And again, all I have to do is, switch this back on again. So that's how you switch on private or public. And all it is visibility for whoever you feel like giving access to, or if you want to make it private. A lot of times what I do is if I'm working on a project that I'm going to sell, as an example, chances are, or if let's say I'm working for somebody else, I have a contract that I'm working with a client, or if I'm working on some research or something, like you've seen here, I might make this project private, as an example. So let's say I'm working on my project for my master's is WebXR security interactions, right? So I'm kind of, right now, it's a private repository until I'm at the point where I want to open it up and share it with others. Or maybe I want to fork this repository and make it available to other people as well. And I can do that by changing the visibility if I like, or inviting people to join me, okay? So that's how it works. That's the visibility piece. It's not that much, and it's not going to take a whole hell of a lot of time to make it happen. It's literally a toggle, and you can invite however many people you want. All right, so that is GitHub. I just wanted to briefly talk about that. I wasn't sure if you knew, but that is, this is how you would collaborate. And I'm just going to put in, include Nick as a collaborator, and the way you do that is you add Sir Malfolon, right? Because that is his GitHub account name. Okay, so that's how you would do it. You can also, if you knew the email address associated with this account name, you can also put that in there as well. Okay. All right, so that is the kind of a high-level detail, I would say, as much as I can give you on the final practical exam. I'm hoping that this is going to be good enough information for you to get going. Again, I've given you until Saturday, April 24th at midnight to get this done. I don't think it's going to take you the whole week to do, but I wanted to take away some of the stress from having a timed exam and give you the opportunity for you to have some time for thought and reflection and, have put this together. I know some of you aren't, kind of focused on programming. You're a technical artist, or you're a level designer, or you're a producer. And again, I wanted to give you the opportunity for you to do that. And I've also broken the exam in half kind of thing, like with the written exam and the practical exam, in order for you guys to have a fair chance to do well overall on your exam for this course, which is usually pretty deadly. All right, any questions for the people that are physically on YouTube? I'll wait for a second, or anyone on Discord. I'm willing to take questions on this as well. I do apologize for the sound problem in the beginning. Just going to wait a second, because usually I'm about a minute or so behind the people who are online. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. If you do have questions, I'll try and answer them on Discord. But otherwise, I'm hoping this is good enough to get you going, and hopefully that'll get your mind into what I'm looking for in terms of the effect. So again, take the scene, create your depth of field effect that you want, and then as a bonus, if you want, and if you have time, add Bokeh. Okay, and that'll be a kind of a really great thing to round out this semester, and you'll know most of the post-processing effects that are most common in video games today. Otherwise, guys, if we don't see each other and we don't talk again, thank you so much for making this semester really fun for me. I look forward to working with you guys in third year or in another year. Take care and good luck on your final practical exam.